You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
We're standing outside ZSL London Zoo in Regent's Park. For this viewpoint, we'll be investigating the zoo's key role in popularizing modernist housing in Britain through animal housing designed by prominent architects in the 1930s and championed by politically engaged zoologists. One of the leading figures in the story was Bertold Lubetkin, born in the country of Georgia to a Jewish family. As a young adult, Lubetkin was exposed to revolutions, both aesthetic and political, witnessing both an art scene shaped by constructivism and the Russian Revolution. Lubetkin came to Britain via Paris, where Le Corbusier and other modernist architects were practicing. There, Lubetkin also met a variety of figures from other disciplines, including writers Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. When Lubetkin arrived in Britain at the beginning of the 1930s, he became integrated into several intellectual circles. He met artist Roger Fry, a leading figure in the Bloomsbury Group, and he also attended gatherings hosted by writer H.G. Wells, which brought scientists and architects together. Through these exchanges between zoologists and early modernists, the opportunity arose for Lubetkin and his newly created firm, Tecton, to devise a new approach to zoo architecture. In this way, they turned their attention to the needs of multiple species, with unique body mechanics, sightlines, and community structures. For the zoo administrators who sponsored them, these experiments had political as well as scientific and aesthetic value. Following his collaboration with the communist Lubetkin, Peter Chalmers Mitchell, the secretary of the Zoological Society of London, left the organization to fight on the side of the socialists in the Spanish Civil War. That brought Julian Huxley to the helm of the organization, and Huxley's understanding of the interrelationship of government, science, and the arts can be seen especially clearly in his later role as the first leader of UNESCO. Through the burgeoning field of ethology, the study of animal behavior, often as a means of understanding human behavior, Huxley considered the possibilities and evolution of human social structures. His research on ants gave him a lens for understanding especially elaborate expressions of collective life and the distribution of labor and resources. For Huxley, then, modernism was more than an aesthetic. As he stated in a 1937 address, the so-called modern style is not a style, it is the attempt to realize a revolution. Once Lubetkin's work had become a reality, Huxley even made the gap between suitable modernist animal housing and housing for the working class a call to arms. In his 1934 book Scientific Research and Social Needs, he included two images with the caption, "A Contrast in Housing." Compare these human habitations in the slums with this home for apes at the London Zoo. Though Lubetkin and his firm Tecton also completed work at Dudley and Whipsnade zoos, I'd like to focus on their creations for the Regent's Park site, particularly the Gorilla House Huxley mentioned, also called the Round House and completed in 1932, and the Penguin Pool completed in 1934. These structures were among those featured in the 1936 documentary film The New Architecture in the London Zoo, made by Bauhaus artist Laszlo Moholy-Nagy as a testimony to this innovation. One of the most striking features of the Gorilla House was its adaptability. In the colder months, visitors would enter the building to view the animals in their designated winter housing. As the journal Nature noted in a news item it featured about the structure's unveiling, the Gorilla House regulated the conditions for these primates, with the air, quote, filtered, warmed, and moistened before passing into the chamber, which is free from drafts. In the summer, the screen and roof were moved via a cog system so that the grills received sunlight and fresh air, with the zoogoers viewing the enclosure from the outside. Rather than trying to artificially recreate the natural environment through decoration, Lubeckin's architecture highlighted the structural qualities of the design through white walls. In this way, instead of mimicking nature, the structures were intended to enable animals' innate movements and behavior, along with fostering their health. We see something quite similar in the creation of Lubeckin's penguin pool, which offered a particularly daring application of reinforced concrete, an important material for modernist architecture. The design incorporates two spiraling concrete ramps unsupported by any posts for the penguins to walk upon. At the bottom of those ramps was an oval pool of water to allow the penguins to swim. We can easily see engineering's importance to the modern movement through the technical knowledge structural engineer Ove Arup applied to achieving that spiral form, in addition to the advice he provided when Lubeckin was creating the gorilla house. Let's consider now why the London Zoo offered the first big break for modernist housing in Britain. As one reviewer for The Times noted in 1937, radically new approaches to architecture are not easily accepted by the wider public, particularly when they concern a structure as personal as the home. Zoo buildings such as the Gorilla House and the Penguin Pool thus allowed citizens to encounter modernist housing in a public space. Even more, the zoo was already a place in which attendees were open to sights and experiences not encountered in their everyday lives. The Times critic went so far as to write, "As an institution popular with all classes, the zoo is an admirable field for the development of architecture towards its recovery, more and more evident as a communal art rather than an art of individual expression." That attitude certainly chimed with the public-mindedness of Huxley and Lubeckin's approach to architecture. In fact, we see a direct tie between this animal housing and Lubeckin's approach to human housing through his decision to build a country house for himself on Whipsnade Zoo property, a location that allowed him to skirt planning regulations. Lubeckin channeled his attention to hygiene, health, and welfare developed through these zoo projects into his subsequent work with Tecton. In the mid-1930s, Lubeckin created the Finsbury Health Center, a remarkably forward-thinking initiative. Many scholars point to the fact that this effort served as an important precedent for the National Health Service, which formed 1 decade later. Further into the 1930s, Lubeckin applied the experience he gained from the zoo to designing complexes High Point 1, High Point 2, and the Spa Green Estate, the latter a council housing project completed after World War II. Through this suite of projects, we can recognize the important role that modern architecture played in the experimental communities, both human and animal, which anticipated the establishment of the post-war welfare state. Indeed, zoo administrators and pioneering architects quite consciously treated the zoo as a prototype for that better Britain to come. As we've just seen, modernism at the London Zoo had a long-term effect on the political sphere, but let's also think about its larger impact in the arts, particularly British literature. With the visionary tendencies of early architectural modernism and its zoologist sponsors, it's no surprise that these figures and projects caught the attention of writers of speculative fiction, who often express reservations about the planned future politicians, architects, and scientists attempted to bring into being. The name Julian Huxley has likely brought to your mind another prominent figure from the 1930s, Julian's younger brother, Aldous Huxley, a writer most famous for his dystopian novel Brave New World. Alongside his brother, Aldous was part of the influential Political and Economic Planning Policy Group, in the early part of the decade, and he was integrated into the same social circles that brought about the alliance between zoologists and modernist architects. However, his architectural criticism from that period, the same one in which he wrote Brave New World, leads us to a more nuanced understanding of both that novel and the reception of the modern movement. Aldous' essays disavow the modernist emphasis on health and hygiene, dismissing that architecture as antiseptic, and they express concern about the close alliances between modernist design, scientific rationalism, and collectivist politics. In his 1931 piece, The New Romanticism, for instance, he describes collectivism as inherent in modernist architectural practice. The Bolsheviks, he writes, are romantic in denying that man is anything more than a social animal, susceptible of being transformed by proper training into a perfect machine. To link modernist form to the mechanistic view of human nature he attributes to communism, Aldous quotes Le Corbusier. The ambition of advanced architects, he says, is to make dwelling houses indistinguishable from factories. In Le Corbusier's phrase, a house is a machine for living in. In his 1958 book, Brave New World Revisited, Aldous goes so far as to refer to the nightmare of total organization emerging in politics and the built environment. Against that extreme order, he holds up the medium of literature. For reading is a private, not a collective activity, he writes. Ultimately, Aldous claims, human beings are not completely social. Their societies are not organisms, like the hive or the anthill. They are organizations, in other words, ad hoc machines for collective living. We thus see Aldous push back against these animal models for human social organization, as he amends Le Corbusier's famous slogan about the modernist house in order to emphasize the unplannable aspects of human life. Let's draw all this together now. We saw a tension arise in the 1930s between, on one side, zoological and architectural attempts to reshape collective human life, and, on the other, the perceived individuality of literature, as Aldous would have it. At the same time, the intellectual networks of this decade, with the London Zoo as a nexus, testify to the entwinement of scientific, political, and literary acts of imagination, both utopian and dystopian. In this way, these zoological applications of modernist housing allowed a variety of thinkers to reach new understandings of welfare and of what it means to live and evolve within a complex community, a social and architectural ecosystem, if you will.